Good afternoon, grade 7 learners. In front of you is Mr. Ngozi, a teacher of technology who teaches at Nkululeko Higher Primary. Nkululeko Higher Primary is in Tanzania, NU1, in East London, in Eastern Cape. And I hope that we have been able to access our third video and our second video and our first video from YouTube. These videos are meant to help you to be engaged during this time of coronavirus, and I also hope that you have all the necessary things to protect yourself against coronavirus. You must also always wash your hands during this time of coronavirus so that you minimize the chances of you getting the virus. I also hope that you have been able to download the Sasol Inzalo Technology Learner's Book, which is accessible on the internet. It's a book that contains all the activities for the lessons that we do. That is why I'm not giving any activities on this lesson, because I know that you would have downloaded the book and you are doing the activities. Just to recap on the work that we have done so far, we started speaking about structures, and I am confident that by now you know what is a structure and you are able to define a structure, which we said a structure is anything around you which is constructed from a variety of parts that are held together to form one object. That object becomes a structure. And structures come in three types as illustrated in the board in front of you. The first type of a structure is a frame structure. The second type is a shell structure. The third type is a solid structure. So are the three types of structures that we have. The examples of frame structures is a chair. The example of a shell structure is a snake. And then the example of a solid structure is, and you must remember that all the types of structures are tied to their function. For instance, a frame structure, its function is to support a load. So if you are to sit on top of that chair, you become a load to that chair, and that chair supports you as a frame structure. Frame structures, as we have explained, are meant to be strong in order to be able to support the load which might be imposed on it. Another example of a frame structure is a bridge. A bridge that we cross every day, maybe on our way to town or on our way to school. But if there is a bridge, you must know that that bridge is a good example of a frame structure. So another function of a frame structure is to span the gap between two places. If there is village A on your right hand side, there is village B on your left hand side, and there must be a structure that spans the gap in between the villages in order for people from village A to be able to move from that village to village B. That structure does not necessarily close the gap, but it spans it to allow, if there is a water that must pass underneath, that water is able to do so, whilst people and cars are passing on top of the structure. Such a structure must be strong so as to support the load and to continue to span the gap. And then the function of a shell structure is really to protect what is supposed to be inside or to contain what is supposed to be inside. A snail, for an example, if it's disturbed, it will quickly roll itself inside the shell to be protected. An egg, for example, has got an outer shell which protects what is inside the egg. Once that egg is broken, that inside of that egg will collapse, and therefore the structure will no longer stand its function. So shell structures must always be hollow inside in order to create space to contain something or to protect something. And then we moved on to speak about the solid structure, where we said a solid structure is marked by ability to be very strong and rigid. And if you remember about the three phases of matter, you will remember that we've got solids, liquids, and gases. And if we look in those matters in terms of particles, you will appreciate that the solid structure, the particles of the solid structure are very tightly packed without any ability to move, which gives the ability of a structure to be strong and rigid. So solid structures are also used to build frame structures because the frame structures must be strong. Then we went on to classification of structures. We said structures are classified into two forms: natural structures and man-made structures. This one is self-explanatory. If you talk about natural structures, you talk about structures which appear for themselves in the communities where we live. For an example, a mountain. A mountain is a good example of a solid structure which is classified as a natural structure, because no one will say I came on earth and I created a mountain. So it's a solid structure that is classified as what? As a natural structure. Are we together so far? Then a man-made classification of structures refers to all the structures that are made by human beings, such as a brick, which is a solid structure in terms of type and is classified as man-made. So those are the things that we discussed in our previous lessons, and I hope you will be able to remember them as we are going to move to our next lesson. So give me a second as I usher ourselves into the next lesson. Welcome back. I have said that our next lesson will be based on further investigation of frame structures. Remember that we said the frame structures are marked by their ability to be able to support load and to be able to span gaps, and they must always be strong in order to resist all forces that act on it. So today we'll be focusing on forces that act on frame structures. We'll be focusing on forces that act on frame structures. And you remember that we said anything which is constructed from a variety of parts to make one object becomes what? A structure. So a structure has got forces that act on it. For instance, we've got a gravitational force. A gravitational force is a universal force that acts on all structures. If you take something and throw it up, it will always come back because there's a force that acts on it which brings it down to the ground. That force that acts on it is called the gravitational force, or force of what? Of gravity. Now, how does the gravitational force act on frame structures? We'll take, for example, a frame structure called a cell phone tower. Cell phone towers must always be firm on their ground. Cell phone towers must always be stable in order to resist all the other forces that might act on the structure to try to collapse it. So the gravitational force brings stability to frame structures. And the gravitational force, the force that is exerted by gravity on structures, will always be equal to the mass of that structure. We normally say in our classes, the force of gravity will always be proportional to the mass of a structure. So if the gravitational force is acting on a structure and the mass of a structure is equal to 4 grams, that force of gravity will also be equal to that kind of a mass which the structure has. So the advantage of the gravitational force on frame structures helps the frame structures to be stable. Stability refers to the ability of a structure to reclaim its position. Even if there are forces that are acting on a structure, but if a structure is acted upon by gravitational force, that means the structure will be stable, and therefore the structure will claim its position, always be on its position, because there is gravitational force that acts on it, which helps it to be stable. What is another force that acts on a structure? Another force that acts on a structure is called tension force. The tension force helps to stretch the object or the structure. You see that the shape of the structure as it goes up is becoming small, and it must always be kept like that. That tension force helps the structure to keep its shape, because at the ground level the structure must be wide in order to help the structure to be stable. And this reduction of the shape of the structure helps to reduce the mass of the structure, which is exerted by this structure to the base of the structure. This will help the structure to resist any kind of force that comes and pushes it down, because the base of that structure is wide enough to keep the stability of that kind of a structure. So that tension force helps to stretch the object. And then compression force is one which we see on struts. It helps to always compress the structure towards a shape that must be taken by a structure. Because if a structure must be small on top and it must be wide at the bottom, that structure has to be compressed to always be taking its shape, which is necessary for the structure to keep its stability at the bottom. The beam here helps to do what? To bring the tension force into the structure so that the structure is able to be wide enough and be able to sustain whatever forces that act on it. So the force of gravity is important, because without the force of gravity, there will be no tension force, there will be no compression force, or these forces will be useless. So the gravitational force is a major determinant of what are the other forces that act on objects and what is the effect of those. that act on that object. So if there is pushing force, that gravitational force will help to stabilize the structure. The tension force will help uh, to widen the gap so that the structure is not easily collapsed. The compression force will help to compress this part so as to reduce the mass going down, to distribute the mass equally going down. That is the lesson we have to engage in today about the forces that act on frame structures, and I hope that tomorrow we'll be able to engage in another lesson which I think will be on will investigate further the frame structures, how frame structures are built, why there must be a lot of framework, how to strengthen the structure in order to resist all the forces that act on it, all the unnecessary, the pulling and pushing forces that act on the structure, which sometimes might be greater than the gravitational force. How do we then create a structure which will be stable even in cases where the pushing or pulling force is greater than the gravitation? So tomorrow we'll be learning more about how to strengthen the frame structures, because our mini practical assessment task will require us to build a frame structures which are firm on the ground and are stable enough to resist any kind of pushing or pulling forces that act on it. That brings us to the end of the lesson. Thank you very much.